even when you say free speech absolutism, you have problems like libel and slander and so forth, which are traditionally in the Anglo-American world recognized as exceptions to freedom of speech, even in the American tradition where we have the First Amendment, also in the British tradition. And one of the examples of kind of the abuses of the world we live in is that those laws have been suspended for certain powerful people. And so basically the right to libel was given by New York Times versus Sullivan in the 60s to basically the most powerful people on earth. And we sort of all live kind of staring down the barrel of that gun. And so even to say basically, hey, more free speech is good. I'm like, no, actually, it's not good that the most powerful people in the world have basically the freedom to lie as long as there's no actual malice. Maybe there's like just a little bit of malice, or maybe, I mean, I don't think anybody's really sure what actual malice means. But effectively, once you sort of give this incredible megaphone kind of carte blanche to lie, you're basically like, okay, there's a certain sense in which lies are free speech, and I would like to cut back on that free speech. I don't believe that freedom should exist, and moreover, freedom which is not lawful and orderly is as the founders would have said, license. Not only should that license be revoked, but attention has to be paid to all the benefits that were achieved through that license for that power. And so, yeah, I'm basically like, sort of, I don't complain that I deserve to have free speech because I don't believe that we live in a sort of an orderly world where I don't have that freedom. We don't have that freedom. And so to basically say, hey, I should have this freedom that I don't have is a sort of weak, kind of complaining point of view that doesn't really necessarily even fit with any kind of coherent political philosophy, in as much as maybe it's a good idea, but it's never been tried. The idea of like, I'm going to sort of complain to you about our shared values when you're in the midst of what is essentially a cold civic conflict, it doesn't work. It doesn't cut a great deal of ice. It's sort of nice to like, it's nice to have a sort of sense of commonality with the Glenn Greenwalds of the world and the people who basically are sort of sincere believers in these values. We shouldn't neglect the fact that those people tend to be greatly outnumbered by the people that can make sort of any excuse for what they're doing. And to get people to see like I think one of the things that sort of goes on with the, like, sort of no true Scotsman left, where they're basically like, like Eric Weinstein will give you this, often it's like, I didn't leave the left left me, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, no, actually, you lay down with dogs, and then you're like, I got up with fleas, right? And it's like, are you the real left, or are they the real left? Well, there's a lot more of them than there are of you. And so I feel like they own this at a certain level. That step is very, very difficult for people to sort of get beyond, because sort of the conclusion, I mean, I don't think, say, George Orwell even really got beyond that. George Orwell was always like the left me kind of guy, even as his critiques of it became very, very fundamental and very, very deep. He sort of like didn't quite learn the ability to kind of step outside of that and sort of join. He never considered himself sort of a man of the right. And the way I like to define the right is just the absence of left. So for me, basically, the left that we don't like is the true left. And if you're not a leftist, you're a rightist, and therefore Glenn Greenwald is a rightist. I don't think Glenn Greenwald would agree with that at all. But still, like, that's not to say, I mean, you can't sort of demand like sort of complete enlightenment from your allies, right? And but having that sense of like seeing sort of the dead endness of the like we are the real left is like, I think should sort of teach you that there are other things, or should teach these people that there are other things out there besides thinking in this way. And the like one of the things that sort of free speech absolutism kind of does to the right is that it makes the right overly tolerant of its own errors. And so basically, and I think it's actually really important on the right to be tolerant of sort of everyone as people, but not to basically sort of accept any kind of error in general, just because those are the errors of the people on your side. You should accept the people completely and unconditionally. But the thing is that the way it once you sort of get out of the free speech mindset, you're like, the way to win is actually to speak in a way that is more compelling and more confident than your sort of opponents. And like, there's nothing confident about complaining. Complaining is just always a really, really bad, like, I mean, it's just not sexy. Like, you should basically be like, okay, yeah, you know what? We're telling the truth, and you can beat us and burn us and ban us, all you want. You have that power. The sense of like, I'm going to like sort of the reflex to basically point out the crimes of your enemy implies a judge who is above your enemy. Lenin, I think, is like, yeah, why should we let our enemies have guns? Our enemies would not let us have guns. And, if they did, so much for the worse for them. And speech is even more powerful than guns. I think this is a Stalin line or something like that. But yeah, I mean, like, essentially, they're whatever the limits of the crackdown on speech are, I think they are coming not from sort of the enemy's conscience, but just kind of from his weakness in a way. And if you basically are thinking of that just in terms of a weakness, you're sort of like appealing to that. You can't really appeal to a weakness. You should just basically take advantage of that weakness, because every time you basically complain, you're just showing your own weakness. Yeah, it sucks to get banned from Twitter all the time. It sucks to like not be able to use your real name. It sucks to like all of these things really suck. And yet, like I mean, it's like if you look at the like crackdown, the post-Trump crackdown on speech on the internet, it's like, okay, most people would say this is a bad thing. Okay, yes, in many ways it was a bad thing. It was a very, very damaging and damaged a lot of people's lives. It also, and it, did deplatforming really does significantly suppress speech. At the same time, there's a kind of evolutionary effect where it basically suppresses the weak but leaves the strong. That's basically a good thing, because all sort of movements need their kind of worst elements to be kind of weeded out in a way. And I think that it sort of made kind of the persisting voices that survived kind of stronger and more confident and more attractive and appealing, honestly. And it's like, basically, as long as kind of we can be more appealing than our enemies to the best people in the world, that's great. And so, like, even the sort of crackdown is something that's sort of useful in some ways in our terms, just because of that sort of evolutionary effect in, like, hard times create strong men, right? We've all heard this. It's true. And it's true even in this context. So that's my sort of most perverse case against free speech absolutism.
Well, I think you can see pretty easily how this isn't going to work for us in general, the kind of free speech argument, by just looking at what just happened to libs of TikTok, right? You have a situation where the reporter who was doing this hit piece was what, a week ago online or on a news program, crying, literally crying about being doxxed, about having personal information out there. And of course, she has sympathetic media who's sitting there and babying her and saying, "Oh, poor you, how could this happen to you?" And literally a week and a half later, she's personally knocking on the doors of the family of an anonymous Twitter account that does nothing but repost liberals talking about themselves. And so you're never going to end up in this situation where you're going to win this argument by just asking for it, because they know that this is asymmetrical, right? They know, the reporter who did this, I think it was Taylor Lorenz or something like that. She
Hmm.
went out and did this because she knew that she was going to face no consequences, and the person she was targeting was going to face all of the consequences. And as
Right.
long as and as long as she can generate power, as long as she can generate clout and face zero downside, what are they going to call her, a hypocrite? Oh no, right? Oh, they've got her in a corner now. It's not going to do anything. And so because of that, just hoping that free speech will solve this problem, just appealing to the principle of free speech to people who clearly understand that they can wield it like a club and they can silence you at any moment with zero consequence to them, it's not a compelling case for anyone.
No, no, and it's just like you have to, when you're thinking in terms of, not in terms of like we're sharing this world with a common sense of justice and a common sense of truth, and it's just like, no, we should actually expect nothing. There's always like, there's so many commonalities between, politics and seduction, really. And like the, like, sort of what you're doing when you complain that you're being censored is, it's like complaining to a woman that she won't date you, but she really, like, rightfully should date you because look at all my 16 talking points. Like, you don't seduce a woman by giving her a PowerPoint of the reasons she should date you, right? And I don't think that has ever historically worked. And if it worked, it would be a very strange female.